हरिः ओम् नमः सर्वेभ्यः। अष्टाध्यायी परिचयः इत्यस्य अद्य 40तमः पाठः। अस्मिन् वर्गे रेफस्य अग्रे आदेशाः कथं विधीयन्ते तत् सूत्राणाम् आधारेण पठामः। शुक्लाम्बरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। येनाक्षरसमाम्नायमधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृत्स्नं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयम्। अस्माकं वर्गस्य द्वे प्रयोजने अष्टाध्याय्याः आहत्य 600 सूत्राणां व्याख्यासहितम् उदाहरणसहितं च अध्ययनं, तथा च अष्टाध्याय्याः प्रथमाध्यायस्य प्रथमपादस्य द्वितीयपादस्य च कण्ठस्थीकरणम्। पूर्वस्मिन् वर्गे अस्माभिः पदान्तसकारस्य अग्रे ऋत्वं, तदनन्तरं द्विप्रकारकः रेफः, तदनन्तरं रेफस्य चतुर्विध आदेशविधानम् इत्येतं सर्वं दृष्ट्वा अग्रे रेफस्य विसर्गादेशः कथं विधीयते, तस्य विसर्गस्य अग्रे परिवर्तनं कथं भवति इत्यस्य सूत्राणि अधीतानि। अवशिष्टाः त्रयः आदेशाः इत्युक्ते रेफस्य यकारादेशः, रेफस्य उकारादेशः तथा च रेफस्य लोपः इत्येतेषां विषये अद्य अस्मिन् वर्गे पठामः। तस्मात् पूर्वं ह्यस्तनवर्गस्य सूत्राणां विषये किञ्चित् मया वक्तव्यमस्ति. So there is one point that came to my mind when I was watching the video recording again, that there was something that I did not stress well as much as I wanted to stress. The point is, if you look at the ordering of the sutras, kharvasaniyoho visarjaniyah, visarjaniyasya saha, sharpare visarjaniyah, vashari, and kupvoh kahpau cha. So kharvasani or visarjaniyah is the place where a visarga is created. So that's a sutra that creates the visarga. The next four sutras, Visarjaniyasya saha, Sharpare Visarjaniyah, Vashari, and Kupoho Paucha, will convert that Visarga to something else. Now, the way this is arranged by Panini is very peculiar. The first thing he says is Visarjaniyasya saha, which is the blanket Utsarga, and it says Visarga is converted to Sa unless otherwise mentioned. So, obviously, there is a Khar letter and Avasana. Khar comes as an anuvrutti. So when there is a khar letter in the front, visarga is converted to sa unless otherwise mentioned. The next sutram sharpare visarjaniyah says, in a certain condition, visarga remains visarga. So visargasya visargadeshaha. Saka x is converted to x like that. So visargasya visargadeshaha. So sharpare khari, typical examples are ksha. There is also a discussion on the group about this. So if there is a ksha in front, for example, visarga is converted to visarga. Technically, it is same as saying visarge parivartanam na bhavati, but the way Panini has put it is visarga is converted into visarga. So far, so good. Now, when we come to the next sutram, Vashari, this Va is an option for whom? So technically, the commentaries say that this Visarjaniya is coming as an anuvrutti and the entire sutra becomes Vashari Visarjaniyaha, which means in presence of a shara letter like sa, sh or sh, in presence of a shara letter, visarga is optionally converted to visarga, and as another option by visarjaniyasya saha, it will also get converted to sakara. So the meaning that we have been saying so far, or in yesterday's class, I have written the meaning. Visargasya vikalpena sakaradeshaha bhavati. Say for example, there is a visarga and there is a s or sh in front. Then visargasya vikalpena sakaradeshaha bhavati. Pakshe visargaha eva tishtati. This meaning is correct as far as all practical discussion is concerned. But purely from the point of view of sutra construction, Panini is not saying visargasya sakaradesha vikalpena bhavati pakshe visargaha eva tishtati. Panini Maharshi is saying visargasya vikalpena visargadesha bhavati pakshe sakaradesha bhavati. So both adeshas are given as vikalpa because sharpare visarjaniya has the visarjaniya word which comes as an anuvritti. And therefore, if you look at the sutrartha carefully, I am not stressing on the actual sutrarthas. I am more focusing on the human readable sutrathas or easily understandable sutratha that come later in the PPT. But if you look at the sutrartha that appears right below the sutra, this should be clear from that. शरि परे विसर्गस्य विसर्ग एव वा स्यात्. सो विसर्गस्य विसर्गादेशः विकल्पेन भवति, पक्षे सकारादेशः भवति. Similarly, if you go to the next sutram, kupoho kha paucha, in that sutram also, this cha brings the va and the visarjaniya down. And the entire sutra becomes that in front of kakara, visarga is optionally converted to visarga and to jivhamulya. So, ka varge pa varge cha pare, visarga visarjaniyasya kramat jivhamulya upadmaniya ustaha Chad Visargaha, and as another option, Visarga is converted to Visarga. So, in all these sutras of the Visarga Sandhi, as per the construction mechanism in Ashtadhyayi, Visarga is converted to Visarga. In the yesterday's PPT, I did not stress on this point because it is more of a theoretical nature. For all practical purposes, it is perfectly okay to say Visargaha tadrishaha eva tishtati, Visarge parivartanam na bhavati. It's perfectly okay to say that because eventually it's the same meaning. But purely from the sutra point of view, Visargasya Visargadeshaha bhavati, Pakshe Sakaradeshaha, Nochet Jivhamulyaha, Upadmanya, all these are optional conversions. Let's move ahead. So this was the discussion from the yesterday's class. Idanim Adyatanavargasya Vishayam Prarabhamahe. So let's quickly revise the Padantarepha. Samskrita Vyakarane Vidyamanaha Padantarephaha Dvividhaha. First is Rutva Prakarnasya Sutverena Rutvam Krutva Tadanantaram Itsamnya Lopam Krutva Yaha Rephaha Siddhyati. So you have Rama plus Su getting converted to Rama plus Ru, and then Itsamnya Lope Krute Rama R iti Siddhyati. Similarly, Payas plus Su प्रत्यय से लोपे कृते स इति पदांत सकारः तस्य ऋत्वे कृते पयरु and payara. Similarly, bhavan tarati ityatrapi. This is the same slide from the yesterday's class. And then we have rutvam vinasiddha padamtarepha. That could be because of the avyaya, or that could be because of a pratipadikam like gira, or that could be because of a certain sandhikaryam like pitru plus ngasi and so on. So we looked at these two types of padantarethas, and then we discussed what happens to this padantarepha. So padantarephasya adeshaha, and there was a different version of this matrix, this diagram, which was given in yesterday's class. I have added a few more details in this diagram which are relevant for today's class. So let's look at it once again in details. Padantarephasya khar varne pare visargadeshaha bhavati. So avasane pare khar varne pare, but that avasana is not relevant today. So khar varne pare visargadeshaha bhavati. This is what we studied in yesterday's class. Munir plus tatra ityatra rephasya visargadeshe krute munihi tatra iti bhavati. So that is the Visargadesha, one quadrant is done. Now Padantarephasya lopaha kada bhavati. Padantarephasya rephe pare lopaha bhavati. So if you have a Padantarepha and if you have another over there, in general, so all these titles that are written over here are Utsargas. There will be some further conditions, but for now I have omitted them. Just a top level discussion is being done. So in general, Padantarephasya rephe pare lopaha bhavati. So if you have Uchchair Ratanam, or if you have, say, for example, Munir Rakshati, so that R which is at the end of the pada, when it sees another R in front of it, the first R is removed. You say Uchchair Ratanam. R is gone away. So that is Padantarephasya rephe pare lopaha. The third is Ru ityasya yakaradeshaha. So remember from yesterday's diagram that the columns on the right side are specific to Ru. So now we are only talking about the Padantarepha that is generated from Ru. So Ru ityasya yakaradeshaha. Kada bhavati? Akarat va parasya Ru ityasya yakaradeshaha bhavati. So A and A are very special swaras. They have special treatment being done over here. So akarat parasya ru ityasya, like say for example balar asit, or akarat parasya ru ityasya balar gachanti. In both these cases, the r is generated from ru. So in balar, it is the sasajusho ruhu sutra that converts the s to ru. In case of balar, again there is a jas pratyaya. Jas pratyaya jakara is its samyak. So as iti avashishyate. Again the terminal s you have to apply sasajusho ruhu to create balar. So bala plus as, bala plus ar becomes balar. बालार गच्छन्ति इत्यत्र आकारात् परस्य रु इत्यस्य and balar आसीत् इत्यत्र अकारात् परस्य रु इत्यस्य यकारादेशः भवति. So that's y getting generated. And finally पदान्तरु इत्यस्य उकारादेशः अकारात् परस्य. So in some particular cases, so the previous one was also akarat parasya. Additional cases I have omitted. I will explain that on the upcoming slides. But padantaru ityasya ukaradesha tatrapi akarat parasya eva. The other conditions differ, but the purva nimitta must be hrasva akara. So akarat parasya padantaru ityasya ukaradesha. The examples are ramar atra. So rama plus su plus atra. Su becomes ru. Ramar atra. That time r becomes u. Similarly, ramar gacchati, that time r becomes u. So padantare phasya khar varne pare visargadesha, that is completely covered in yesterday's class. Padantare phasya rephe pare lopaha, this is the bit that we are going to cover all the way towards end of today's class. But then akarat akaratva parasya ru ityasya yakaradesha, this is what we are going to start studying right away, because there are lots of sutras about this. And then we will take a laghu virama, and after the laghu virama we will talk about akarat parasya padantaru ityasya ukaradesha. And then in all other situations, so look at what is being given over here. Padantarefasya khar varne pare, so we'll ignore the khar varna. The remaining set is ash. If you remove the khar, I mean, if you out of the entire al pratyahara, if you get rid of khar, what remains is called ash pratyahara. So the remaining three quadrants are related to the ash pratyahara. Now from the ash pratyahara, when there is a repha in front, there is a repha lopa. The padanta repha is removed. For other two boxes, we are only talking about akarat or akarat parasya ru ityasya. So the question is, what happens if there is an ikarat paraha rephaha, ukarat paraha rephaha, or even what happens if there is akarat paraha rephaha which is not generated from ru. So for example, punar, let me write it down. So for example, punar plus atra. So here you cannot apply this akarat parasya padantaru ityasya ukaradesha because it is not the repha generated from ru. None of the other three boxes are also applicable because akarat parasya padantaru ityasya yakaradesha na sambhavati. There is no padantaru over here. Padanta rephasya rephe pare lopaha, there is no repha. And padanta rephasya khar varne pare visargadesha, there is no khar varna. So none of these boxes are applicable in cases like punar plus atra or munir plus gacchati and so on. In all these cases, anyatra padanta rephasya kopi adesha na bhavati. So these are the four adeshas. In all other cases, repha remains as it is, munir gacchati, punaratra, punarmilamaha, pituradnya, and so on. So these are the four important conversions, out of which one of them has been discussed in yesterday's class. The other three are going to be discussed in today's class. Here is the summary of what I just taught. So I'm going to now quickly run through the slides. Rephasya khar varne pare visargadeshaha bhavati. That is the first quadrant. Ataha khar bhinne varne pare ityukte ash varne pare. The three other possibilities. Yakaradesha, ukaradesha, lopaha. Out of that, let's cover the lopa part because that's very easy. Yaha padantarephaha ru ityasmat nirmitaha nasti. So let's take two branches. Ru ityasmat nirmitaha nasti and ru ityasmat nirmitaha asti. Padantarephaha ru ityasmat nirmitaha nasti, like punar and so on. Tasya vishaye rephe pare lopaha bhavati. Sutra is rori. Rephe pare rephasya lopaha bhavati. Punararamate, r goes away, it becomes punaramate. Then there is yet another sutram that does a dirghadesha, you get punaramate. We'll learn that sutra towards the end of the class. Etat sthalam vihayanyeshu sthaleshu kimapi parivartanam na bhavati. So yaha padantarephah sakshat r iti asti, ru ityasmat nirmita nasti. Tasya sandarbhena niyamaha bahu sulabhaha. If there is a r in front, then you just do the refa lopa and then you do the dirgha. If there is no r in front, you simply do varnamelanam. So punarmilamaha, punaratra, and so on. Now comes the more important part. The right two columns are restricted for padanta refa generated from ru. So यहाँ पदांत रेफः ru इत्यस्मात् निर्मितः अस्ति. तस्य आदेशं ज्ञातुं ru इत्यस्मात् पूर्वं विद्यमानः वर्णः द्रष्टव्यः. And if you remember from that table, ru इत्यस्मात् पूर्वं अकारः नो चेत् आकारः अस्ति चेत् विशेषकार्यं तत्र उक्तम् अस्ति. So let's keep that aside and let's take the general case first. So padantaru ityasmat purvam akara akara bhinnah swarah yadi vartate. So if there is no akara and if there is no akara before that padantaru, then we revert back to the left columns of the table. Again, if there is a repha in front, rori ityanena rephasya rephe pare lopaha. So munir plus ramate will become muni ramate, because the left columns are generic for all types of rephas. So we used those for the padamta repha that is not generated from ru, and we are also using those for padamta repha that is generated from ru but which doesn't have a or a before it, so that no other sutram from the right side will be applicable. So you have padantaru ityasmat purvam akara akara bhinnah swarah vardate chet rori ityanena rephasya rephe pare lopaha munirramate becomes muniramate अन्येषु स्थलेषु किमपि परिवर्तनं न भवति मुनिर्गच्छति. Now come the right side of that diagram. Padantaru ityasmat purvam akarah vidyate chet. Now let's go to the diagram. Where is the diagram now? Padantaru ityasmat purvam akarah vidyate chet. It's purely this particular section. There is no consideration of akara anywhere. So padantaru ityasmat purvam akarah vidyate chet padantaru ityasya yakara adeshah bhavati. Remember, all this is when khar letter is not in front. When khar letter is in front, visarga is already happened. We are not talking about it. Now when khar letter is not in front, which means when the ash letter is front, ashvarane pare, that's the primary requirement of all this discussion. Ashvarane pare atra kim bhavati? Yadi padantarephat purvam akarah vidyate chet padantarefasya yakara adeshah bhavati. The sutram is bho bhago agho apurvasya yoshi 8317. This is one of the first sutras that we are going to learn in today's class. So devar atra ityatra devar atra refasya yakara deshe krute, because there is an akara in front and there is an ash letter in, there is an akara before ra and there is an ash letter in front. So devaya atra. Similarly, devaru gachanti becomes devar gachanti becomes devaya gachanti, and so on. So this takes care of padanta ru which has anything but akara before it. The only cases that is remaining now is padantaru ityasmat purvam akaraha vidyate chet. Then either of the two columns, the top column or the bottom column on the right hand side, are applicable. So yakaradeshah ukaradeshah va sambhavati tatra paravarnaha ityukte what ash letter is in front tat visheshatvena drishtva nirnayah karaniyah. So there are three categories done. I have also explained this in yesterday's class. The ashvarna can be a, I'm writing, the ashvarna can be a full akara. The ashvarna can be a, or ashvarna can be any other swara, akara bhinna swara, or ashvarna can be the vyanjana, that's the hash. So three categories. You can have pada. So the situation is that you have an arra. Padanta rephat purvam akara asti. Tasmad akre a bhavitum arhati. No chet anyah swaraha a, I ityadikam bhavitum arhati. No chet hashvarnaha bhavitum arhati. If there is a in front, then there is ukara desha. If there is hash in front, then again there is ukara desha. So Rama plus Ramar plus atra ukara deshe krute Rama u atra. Similarly, Ramar gacchati ukara deshe krute Rama u gacchati. So if there is a in front or if there is a hash in front, you get ukara desha. If there is any other swara in front, you get yakara desha. So that's the only complex bit in this entire discussion. So akara plus ru plus akara. If there is akara in front, then ukara desha bhavati. Atoro raplutadaplute iti sutram. Rama ru atra becomes Rama u atra. अकार प्लस रु प्लस अकार भिन्नः स्वरः अस्ति चेत् यकारादेशः भवति. सेम सूत्रम भो भगो घो अपूर्वस्य योषि. So you see this अपूर्वस्य. So अकारः पूर्वमस्ति चेत्. So यकारादेशः भवति. And Ramaru plus Ishwaraha, Ramara Ishwaraha, R becomes Ya, Ramaya Ishwaraha. Akara plus Ru plus Hasha letter asti chet, Ru ityasya Ukaradeshah bhavati. So Ramaru Gachati becomes Ramar Gachati, becomes Rama U Gachati. Punarekvaramatra Ukaradesha eva Ukta asti. So these are the transformations that we have to study with sutras in today's class. I have given you a running commentary of what we are going to study. Now there are nothing new rules going to be taught, only sutras are to be understood. Any questions so far? Okay, agre gacchamaha. Now, before we start with the discussion of that particular sutram, bho, bhago, agho, apurvasya, yoshi, that's the first sutram we are going to study. Apurvasya part is understandable. There is akaraha purvam, avarnaha purvam vartate. But there are also these other three entities, bho, bhago, and agho. So let's actually look at these three entities and then we will talk about the sutram. So we have bhos. So bhoho is actually bhos, bhagos, and aghos. इत्येतानि त्रीणि अव्ययानि सन्ति. एतानि संबोधनवाचक पदात् पूर्वं प्रयुज्यन्ते. So bhoho is very well known, but similar are the bhagos and aghos. These are sakaranta avyayas. So now you know why we would say bhoho. There is a padanta sakara which is converted to ru, then to ra, and because of an avasana, ra becomes visarga. Therefore, in normal discussions, we will say bhoho. But on the in the actual situation, there is a sakaranta avyaya called bhos, bhagos, and aghos. भोस इति अव्ययम मनुष्याणां संबोधनार्थं प्रयुज्यते. भगोस इति अव्ययम देवानां संबोधनार्थं प्रयुज्यते. अघोस इति अव्ययम राक्षसानां संबोधनार्थं प्रयुज्यते. This is a general convention. This is not a rule of grammar, just a simple usage convention in the language. So bhoho janaha, bhagoho achyuta, aghoho ravana. Can we not say bhoho Ishvara? Obviously, you can say. There is nothing wrong in it. What the observation is that bhos is used for manushas, or it can even be used for devas, but bhagos is specifically reserved for devas and aghos for rakshasas as a matter of convention. So now what happens for these three? एतेषां त्रयाणाम् अन्तिमसकारस्य ससजुषोरुः इत्यनेन ऋत्वे कृते तस्य रु इत्यस्य अग्रे विशेषरूपेण आदेशविधानं कृतम् अस्ति. This is a special case and it is much simpler than that particular matrix. So when you have these three words, bhos, bhagos, and aghos, the sa becomes ru by sasajushoruhu, and then you have bhoru, aghoru, and bhagoru. Obviously, agre avasanam kharvarana asti chet visargadeshah bhavati, same as the previous situation. So kharvasani or visarjaniha iti sutram, ho ho avasane pare visargaha, no chet bhagoho shivaha, aghoho kaitabha, and so on. अन्यत्र सर्वत्र रु इत्यस्य यकारादेशः भवति. So this is very simple. You do not need to worry about the repha or lopa or ukaradesha or yakaradesha, like that matrix 4 quadrants were there. If there is a khar letter, visargaha bhavati, anyatra yakaradeshah bhavati. So bho bhago agho apurvasya yoshi iti sutram bhos janaha sakarasya ऋत्वे कृते भोरुजनाः तस्य अग्रे यकारादेशे कृते भोयजनाः. ज is a मृदु व्यंजन, it is not खर letter, so यकारादेशः कृतः अस्ति. भगोस् देवाः भगोय देवाः, अघोस् राक्षसाः अघोरु राक्षसाः अघोय राक्षसाः. अनेन प्रकारेण अत्र एतेषु स्थलेषु यकारादेशः प्रवर्तते. So with this background, let us now go to the actual sutram. भो भगो अघो अपूर्वस्य योषि. भो भगो अघो अपूर्वस्य. So अघो अपूर्वस्य, you can combine them. No, sorry. They have separated it in the sutrartha. Bho bhago agho purvasya. So bho bhago or agho, that is one aspect. And avarna purvasya. So bho bhago agho purvasya अवर्णपूर्वस्य च रोः इत्युक्ते रु इत्यस्य यादेशः स्यात्, यकारादेशः स्यात् अशिपरे संहितायाम्। अश्वर्णः अग्रे अस्ति चेत् भो भगो अघो अपूर्वस्य रोः इति अनुवृत्तिः संहितायां यकारादेशः भवति। सो हू इज द स्थानी? भो भगो अघो अपूर्वस्य रोः. So bho bhago agho apurvasya is the visheshana. The actual sthani is ru. The transformation is happening on ru. That ru is coming as an anuvritti from the immediate previous sutram. Is it immediate previous or is it like 2-3 sutras earlier? Roho supi. This is roho. This is coming as an anuvritti from roho supi. So from the immediate previous sutram, bho bhago agho apurvasya is the visheshana. Roho ityukte ru ityasya. So which ru? The ru or the r that is that is associated with bho, that is associated with bhago, and that is associated with agho. So bho bhago agho तथा च अवर्णः. अपूर्वस्य means अवर्णः, and whenever you say varnah we mean hrasva as well as dirgha. So you have avarnah ityukte akarah or akarah. There must be a ru, that is the r after these. So the configurations that Panini Maharshi is mentioning are bhor, bhagor, aghor, ar, and ar. So in these situations, whatever ru we are seeing, tasya ashwarne pare ityukte sware pare अथवा मृदु व्यंजने परे किम भवति? यकार आदेशः भवति. यहा, that's right there in the sutram. भोर भगोर अघोर अर आर इत्यत्र विद्यमानस्य रु इत्यस्य अश्वर्णे परे यकार आदेशः भवति. Bhor janaha becomes bhoya janaha. Bhagoru devaha becomes bhagoya devaha. Aghoru asuraha becomes aghoya asuraha. Ramaru asid becomes ramaya asid. Balaru vadanti becomes balaya vadanti. And now observe the badhya badhaka bhava. Obviously the situation is very simple for bho, for bhago, and for agho. And in apurvasya, when it is a and then there is a r. So when it is dirgha akara present over there, yakara desha is always going to happen. The badhya badhaka bhava is specifically in the case of a r. So I have been saying this again and again, but let me repeat it so that it permanently fits in the brain. So if there is a r, then the additional next letter has to be seen. So if r is followed by a, then you have an ukara desha which blocks that yakara desha. If r is followed by hasha letter, then you also have an ukara desha that blocks this yakara desha. And if r is followed by any other swara other than akara, then obviously these blocking sutras don't appear. So you do get yakara desha by write this sutram bho bhago agho apurvasya yoshi. So that's what is being discussed on this particular slide. Atra badhya badhaka bhavaha kada hrasva akaraha plus ru plus hrasva akaraha इत्यत्र ru इत्यस्य उकारादेशः भवति. That particular sutram that creates the ukaradesha is in sapad saptadhyayi 61113 अतोरोरप्लुतादप्लुते इति सूत्रेण अत्र यकारस्य असिद्धत्वात् उकारादेशः भवति. Yakara is clearly asiddha because it is in tripadi, so ukaradeshah bhavati. Similarly, same sutram, not same, the next sutram. Give me 1 minute. So immediately next sutram, 61114 hashicha. This is the next sutram. So hrasva akaraha plus ru plus hashvarnaha इत्यस्यां स्थितौ immediate next sutram same meaning hashicha hashvarणे परे रु इत्यस्य उकारादेशः भवति. Once again यत्वस्य असिद्धत्वात् अत्र उकारादेशः सपाद सप्ताध्यायी सूत्रेण प्रवर्तते. So these two are the vadhakas. Yakaradesham badhitva asiddhatvad badhitva ukaradeshah pravartate. And what are the cases where this sutra will definitely act? Obviously for bho bhago agho it will definitely act, that's a no brainer. But when it comes to apurvasya part, hrasva akaraha plus ru plus akara bhinnaha swaraha, I forgot typing that ru over here. सो ह्रस्व अकारः प्लस रु प्लस अकार भिन्नः स्वरः इत्यत्र तु अनेन सूत्रेण एव यकारादेशः भवति एंड ऑब्वियसली फॉर आकार आकारस्य संदर्भेण तु तत्र सपाद सप्ताध्याय्याम् अपवादः एव नास्ति अतः आकारस्य संदर्भेण सर्वेषु एव अश्वर्णेषु परेषु अवश्यमेव इदं सूत्रं प्रवर्तते सो देवारु अत्र इट कैन बी ह्रस्वकार देवारु आसन it can be akara devaru gachanti it can be hush letter so the three groups that we did for hraswa akara are not relevant for the akara because there is no badhaka in sapada saptadhyayi for akara case the badhakas atororapluta and hashicha are only for hraswa akara case अतः आकारस्य संदर्भेण तु सर्वेषु एव अश्वर्णेषु परेषु भो भगो घो पूर्वस्य योषि इति सूत्रेण अवश्यमेव यकारादेशः भवति एनी क्वेश्चन्स सो फार देयर इज अ क्वेश्चन ओवर हियर पूर्व रूप सूत्रे किमर्थं न भवति सो भो प्लस भगो प्लस अघो इत्यत्र भगो प्लस अघो इत्यत्र पूर्व रूपं भवेत् भगो इज अ पद पदान्ते विद्यमानः ओकारः तदनन्तरम् अकारः अस्ति एङ्गः पदान्तादति इत्यनेन पूर्वरूपं भवेत् सिमिलर्ली अघो प्लस अ इत्यत्र पूर्वरूपं भवेत् अघो पूर्वस्य सो टेक्निकली स्पीकिंग द सूत्रं मस्ट बी भो भगो घो पूर्वस्य योषि किमर्थम् एतादृशं पूर्वरूपं न कृतम् So we are not the only ones who think of this question. Siddhanta Kaumadikara also thinks of this question. And then he says, Asandhihi sautraha. Look at this part. Asandhihi sautraha. He says technically there should be a sandhi, but it is not done. You can't put fingers at Panini. So asandhihi sautraha. Sautra means sutratvat tasya sadhutvam vaktavyam. असन्धिः सौत्र यत्र संधि कर्तव्यः अस्ति तत्रापि न कृतः सूत्रत्वात् तत् उचितं नियम रेशमा जी
Namaste, Madam. My question is, this ru is generated in this tripadi, and this atororat aplutat aplute is in sapada saptati. So how come it is not asiddha?
Yeah, let's talk about it. Probably 20-25 minutes of discussion of today's class will be around that. So good you brought it, but let's hold on to that question. Okay. Anything else? But this is good. One question at least has come up, which shows the numbering problem. We'll talk about it. Now, what we are going to learn before the Laghu Virama is what happens to this yakara going ahead. So, padantarefasya bho bhago agho apurvasya yoshi iti sutrena yakara deshe krute. We never keep this yakara as it is. So, we never say deva ya asit or we never say deva ya asan, deva ya gachanti. Obviously, that yakara has to undergo a lopa because we say deva atra. Yakara has to undergo a lopa. Deva asan, yakara has to undergo a lopa. Deva gachanti, yakara has to undergo a lopa. So then let's see what is the fate of this yakara. Padanta yakarasya agre parivartanam. Ru ityasmat nirmitasya padanta yakarasya agre sarvatra lopaha bhavati. Kutrachit ayam lopaha nityam vidhiyate. Kutrachit vikalpena vidhiyate. So lopa is guaranteed to happen. Sometimes it is compulsory, sometimes it is optional, but lopa is always an option. So lopaha kutrachit nityam vidhiyate, kutrachit vikalpena vidhiyate. And if you look at the sutra patha, after bho bhago agho apurvasya yoshi, there are three sutras: lopashyakalyasya, otogaryasya, and halisarvesham. 8.3.19, 8.3.20, and 8.3.22. These three sutras talk about this particular lopa of yakara. Technically, they talk about the lopa of yakara and vakara both. And I'm going to give you examples of these two. But in the current context, there is no padanta vakara generated from ru. So in the current context, our focus is on yakara. But I'll also give the examples of vakara. So these three sutras, lopashyakalyasya, otogaryasya, halisarvesham, these talk about the lopa of this yakara. Now let's see how this lopa is given by these three sutras. So the first sutram The first sutram, lopashaakalyasya, says akarat akarat va parasya padanta yakarasya sware pare vikalpena lopaha bhavati. Now remember, where is the padanta yakara sitting? It is after akara, or it is after akara, or it is after okara. Bho bhago agho. That's the okara. So that yakara is generated by the sutram bho bhago agho apurvasya yoshi. What it means? That bho there will be yakara, or bhago or agho. So okaradanantaram yakaraha sambhavati, नोचेत अपूर्वस्य. सो अकारादनन्तरं यकारः संभवति, आकारादनन्तरम् अपि यकारः संभवति. सो आउट ऑफ दीज थ्री केसेस, अकाराद आकाराद वा परस्य पदान्त यकारस्य स्वरे परे, if there is a swara in front, sware pare vikalpena lopaha bhavati. So Ramay asit, somebody was asking this in yesterday's class. Ramay asit ityatra yakarasya vikalpena lope krute Rama asit. And if you don't want to do the lopa, just do the varnamelanam. There is no other sutram. Ramayasit. Devay asan, deva asan, or devayasan. Why didn't I write the other one? Let's write it. I'll write it later on. So devay asan becomes deva asan or devayasan. So yakarasya vikalpena lopaha bhavati. Only when there is a swara in front. So Ramay plus asit. I'm not talking about other situations. The next is otogargyasya. Otogargyasya ityatra bho, bhago and agho. That okara is being discussed. So yaha yakaraha okaradanantaram vidhiyate. Otaha okaradanantaram vidhiyate. Tasya yakarasya पुनरेकवारं स्वरे परे नित्यम लोपः भवति. So bho, bhago and agho, the lopa is compulsory even when there is a swara in front. For akara and akara, lopa is optional when there is a swara in front. Only swara is being discussed. So bhoya atra becomes bho atra. Bhagoya ishvaraha becomes bhago ishvaraha. Aghoya asuraha becomes agho asuraha. Yakara lopa is compulsory. The sutram is otogaryasya. And the third sutram, hali sarvesham. Hali ityukte hal varne pare. So we have already discussed the case of swara and we have already discussed the case of sware pare. Now hal varne pare sarvesham. Sarvesham has two meanings over here. Sarvesham means akara, akara, bho, bhago, agho, sarvesham. And other meaning of sarvesham is sarvesham acharyanam matena. Because you have lopa shakalyasya, so some mata of shakalya is being told. Oto gargyasya, some opinion of gargya is told. So different acharyas have different matas as far as the sware pare is concerned. But vyanjane pare sarvesham matena nityam lopaha bhavati. So bhoya, bhagoya, aghoya इत्येतेषां यकारस्य तथा च अकारात् आकारात् वा परस्य यकारस्य हल वर्णे परे नित्यं लोपः भवति. So the example devaya vadanti. So see, remember the prakriya. There was devasu, I mean by doing just pratyaya and so on. Sasajushoruhu devar vadanti. R becomes ya by bho bhago agho purvasya yoshi. So devaya vadanti. The ya is removed. Deva vadanti. Because there is a vyanjana in front. Bhoya janaha, bho janaha. Bhagoya devaha, bhago devaha. Aghoya ravana, agho ravana. In this particular way, lopashakalyasya, otogaryasya are for ach letters. Hali sarvesham is for hal letters. The complexity over here is that this thing that I mentioned, lopashakalyasya is for ach and otogaryasya is for ach only, is to be inferred. What happens is, if you look at the Sutra Patha has bho bhago agho apurvasya yoshi. So there is only one pratyahara sitting over there in this particular bho bhago agho apurvasya yoshi. There is an ash pratyahara sitting over there. No other pratyahara is visible nearby. So it is that ash pratyahara which comes as ananuvritti in lopashakalyasya, same thing in otogaryasya, same thing in hali sarvesham. So technically, Lopashakalyasya also talks about the entire ash. Otogargyasya also talks about the entire ash. Hali Sarvesham also talks about the entire ash. But this ash gets hidden in Hali Sarvesham because there is Hali sitting over there. So even if that ashi comes up, it is blocked by the Hali. Or in simpler sense, you can say ashi does not even come up. So because the Hali Sarvesham specifically talks about Hali, the remaining part of Asha, which is essentially the Acha, because Asha is eventually Acha plus Hasha, and that entire Hasha is taken in case of Hali. So Hali Sarvesham ityatra Hashvarnasya sarvatra grahanam कृतम अस्ति. So avashishtam kim ach iti avashishtam, and therefore Lopashakalyasya and Otogargyasya are only restricted to ach. All this we learn from the commentary. So Lopashakalyasya and Otogargyasya ubhayatra ash iti anuvartate, परंतु अश इत्यस्मात् हश इति अंशः हलि सर्वेषाम् इत्यनेनैव स्वीकृतः अस्ति, अतः अच् इति यः अवशिष्टः तस्य विषये लोपशाकल्यस्य एंड ओतोगार्ग्यस्य इत्यस्य इत्येतयोः द्वयोः प्रसक्तिः वर्तते. One question might come up in your mind that why is it written Hali Sarvesham? Why not Hashi Sarvesham? Because obviously it is only the Hash letter that is remaining. We are talking about the Ash letters. Ach is being removed. Only Hash is remaining. Why does he say Hali Sarvesham? The doubt is correct. You can have it as Hashi Sarvesham. It will not be a problem. But see how Panini thinks. Alpaksharatvam. He says even if I write even if I write Hal instead of Hush, it's not a big deal because you are not going to find Padanta Yakara in case of letters other than Hush. So I can write Hal, and this is a little bit of redundancy. I understand that, but that redundancy is useful because the immediate next sutram after Hali Sarvesham is Monuswaraha. Padantamakārasya hal varane pare anuswaraha. I can reuse that hali in the next sutram. If I would have written hashi there, I would have needed another word to indicate hali in monuswaraha. So let me combine the two and just say hali sarvesham. Yes, there is redundancy, but for monuswaraha, there is alpaksharatvam. See, beauty of designing Ashtadhyayi. Every now and then you see small gems like this. Anyway, coming back to the discussion, now that I have discussed whole business of this anuvrittis, let's now quickly run over the sutras. So, Lopashakalyasya, Avarna Purvayoho, Padantayoho, Yavayoho, Yakara and Vakara both. Lopaha Ashipare. Sutrartha has to be written as Ashipare. The practicality is Achipare. So Lopashakalyasya apurvasya iti anuvartate ashi vyoho and so on. As I mentioned, it is v plus y. Vyor lahu prayatnatara shakatayanasya ityasmad v plus y iti anuvartate. So padanta vakara padanta yakarasya lopaha padasya iti adhikara asti. So apurvayoho vyoho padasya ashi sankitayam shakalyasya lopaha. Shakalyasya ityukte shakalyasya matena ityukte vikalpena lopaha. All these basically very simple things to understand. So apurvayoho akaraha purvaha yasmat saha apurvaha. So that's apurvayoho vyoho. So you have this pen is not working. A plus y or a plus v and apurvayoho ityukte a or a plus y followed by y or v. So apurvayoho ityukte avarnaha purvaha yasmat saha tayoho vyoho ityukte vakara yakarayoho. So you can read the slides, it's just the discussion, not a big deal. All that eventually says is aya ava aya av apurvayoho is asti. So aya ava aya av ityete purvam vartante chet tatra padanta yakarasya padanta vakarasya cha ashvarne pare, practically achvarne pare shakalyasya matena ityukte vikalpena lopaha bhavati. And this is antyadesha because last letter is being removed. All this is completely just the paribhashas and samnya has been put over here. You can take a look at it at your free time. This is nothing new is being discussed. Just the anuvrittis are pulled in. Tadanta vidhi is applied. Alontyasya is applied and so on. Shakalyasya metena ityukte vikalpena lopaha bhavati. So what is the eventual sutrartha? Avarnat parasya. Avarna means a or a. I only wrote a on the previous slide. I'll fix that. But अवर्णात् परस्य पदान्त यकारस्य पदान्त वकारस्य च अश्वर्णे परे विकल्पेन लोपः भवति. यद्यपि अत्र अशि इति अनुवर्तते तथापि अत्र केवलम् अच्वर्णानामेव उदाहरणानि लभ्यन्ते. हल्वर्णे परे प्रकृतसूत्रेण उक्तं वैकल्पिकं लोपं बाधित्वा हलि सर्वेषाम् इत्यनेन नित्यं लोपः विधीयते. Technically it is hashwarne pare, but the sutram as hali sarvesham, so I wrote halvarne pare. So halvarne pare prakruta sutrena uktam vaikalpikam lopam badhitva hali sarvesham ityanena nityam lopah vidhiyate. So the example, Ramai asit. Rama plus Ru becomes Ya by Bho Bhago Gho Purvasi Yoshi. Ramai asit. Ya is removed optionally, or you can do Varna Melanam. So Lopashakalya Sittinena Vikalpena Yakarasya Lopaha. Balaya Atra, Bala Atra, or Bala Yatra. Interestingly, lopas sarvesham can also be used in the ayadi sandhi, echo yavayavaha. So vane iti becomes vanay iti. There is a padanta yakara and an akara before it. So you can remove that yakara vana iti, or you can do varnamelanam vanayiti. So we did not discuss this at length. I just briefly mentioned that there will be lopas shakalya, but now we are understanding this. Vanay iti ityatra yakarasya vikalpena lopashakalya ityanena lope krute vana iti or vanayiti. श्रियई उद्युक्तः एचो यवायावः इत्यनेन श्रियाय उद्युक्तः श्रियायुद्युक्तः और यकार लोपे कृते श्रिया उद्युक्तः. द्वौ एतौ एचो यवायावः इत्यनेन द्वाव एतौ अवर्णात् वकारः अनन्तरं. सो दिस इज एन एग्जांपल ऑफ वकार. अवर्णात् वकारः अनन्तरम् अस्ति चेत् वकारस्य लोपशाकल्यस्य इत्यनेन विकल्पेन लोपे कृते द्वा एतौ, or you do the varna melanam dvavetau. So that's basically about the lopashakalya. The last point is prakruta sutrena yakarasya vakarasya va lope krute tasya asiddhatvat agre ach sandhi na pravartate. So in dva etau you do not go back to the tripadi for the sapada saptadhyayi. You do not go back to the sapada saptadhyayi for doing the ach sandhi. In Shriya Udyuktaha, you do not go back to Sapada Saptadhyayi. In Vana Iti, you do not go back to the Sapada Saptadhyayi. Asiddham asti, ayam yakara lopaha asiddham asti, ayam tripadi sutrena nirmitaha, atha etadrishe yakara lopi krute, tasya asiddhatvat agre atsandhi na pravartate, atah Rama asid ityatra savarna dirghaha na sambhavati. Any questions on lopashakalya? This should be very easy. The next one is also equally easy. Oto gargyasya. As I mentioned, this specific question sutram is for bho, bhago and agho. So okarat parasya padanta yakarasya nityam lopaha syat. Remember we mentioned that for bho, bhago and agho, the lopa is nityam. Even though the sutra uses a name of acharya, this name is purely for giving credit, purely for paying respect. पूजार्थम अत्र विकल्पार्थम अस्य आचार्यस्य नामग्रहणं न कृतमस्ति. इदं सर्वं व्याख्यानात् स्पष्टी भवति. अतः ओतः गार्ग्यस्य, टेक अ लुक एट अनुवृत्ति अधिकार एंड सो ऑन. द सूत्रार्थ इवेंचुअली इज ओकारात् परस्य पदान्त यकारस्य. सो द व्योः कम्स एज एन अनुवृत्ति, परंतु पदान्त वकारस्य आवश्यकता नास्ति. दिस सूत्रम इज ओनली फॉर भो, भगो एंड अघो. In case of lopashakalya, the sutra was used in two places. One is for the Rutva-desha prakaranam that we are currently studying, Ramay Asit and so on. And second is for Echo Yavayavaha. So for that Echo Yavayavaha, Padanta Vakara was also needed, like Dvau, Etau and so on. Therefore, we took Yakara and Vakara both. But this sutra is actually very easy. It's only for Bho, Bhago and Agho. So you do not need any specific purpose of including vakara. So atra okarat parasya padanta yakarasya ashwarne pare nityam lopaha bhavati. Same copy paste. यद्यपि यत्र अशि इति अनुवर्तते तथापि अत्र केवलम् अच्वर्णानामेव उदाहरणे लभ्यन्ते. Blah blah blah. And similarly, the sutram is about general okar. यद्यपि अत्र सूत्रे ओतः इति उच्यते तथापि अत्र केवलं भोय, भगोय, अघोय एतेषाम् एव उदाहरणानि लभ्यन्ते. सो भोय प्लस अत्र अच्वर्णस्य अत्र उदाहरणं दत्तव्यं. भो अत्र bhago ishvaraha, agho asuraha, and so on. Let's do the dalakrutyam of this particular sutram. Okarat parasyeti kimartham. The sutram is only related to bho, bhago, and agho. So vane asit इत्यत्र लोपशाकल्यस्य इत्यस्यैव प्रयोगः करणीयः. ओतो गार्ग्यस्य इत्यनेन नित्यः यकारलोपः अत्र न करणीयः. So the reason why two sutras are made separate, lopashakalyasya and oto gargyasya, is that oto gargyasya forces a compulsory yakara lopah, nityam lopah bhavati, whereas lopashakalyasya, which is for a ya and aya, it forces an optional, or it allows an optional lopah. So अत्र ओकारात् परस्य पृथक् सूत्रं किमर्थं स्थापितं? वने आसीत् इत्यादिषु स्थलेषु यकारस्य नित्यं लोपः मा भूत्, लोपशाकल्यस्य इत्यनेन विकल्पेन एव तत्र लोपः इष्यते. पदान्त यकारस्य इति किमर्थं? All this discussion is for the padanta yakara vakara, and nothing new over here. We started with padanta sa, so then it becomes padanta ra, so then it becomes padanta ya. So we are not leaving that padanta point anywhere. But let's focus. Why padanta yakara? Because there are many other places like the word toya, where there is a padanta yakara after okara. So all that sutra is saying is okarat parasya yakarasya lopha. Such a general sutram. So okarat parasya yakarasya lopah, that yakara must be padanta yakara, because otherwise in words like toyam, so toyam ityatrapi okarat paraha yakaraha asti. See how cleverly people have thought about this. तोयम इत्यत्र ओकारादनन्तरं यकारः अस्ति, तत्र अपदान्त यकारस्य एतादृशः लोपः न इष्यते, केवलं पदान्त यकारस्य एव अनेन प्रकारेण लोपः भवति. And why only yakara? केवलं यकारस्य किमर्थम् अनुवृत्ति? ओकारात् परस्य पदान्त वकारस्य उदाहरणं न लभ्यते. So in लोपशाकल्यस्य उदाहरण was available. ओकारात् परस्य पदान्त वकारस्य उदाहरणं न लभ्यते, अतः तस्य अनुवृत्ति अत्र आवश्यकी नास्ति. On the previous slide, I skipped all that anuvritti sahitam sutram and so on. I'm going to do the same thing for all the sutras going ahead, because it does not make sense for me to repeat every now and then that here is tadanta vidhi and here is alontyasya and here is visheshana vishesha and so on. If you're not revising previous classes, you will not understand it, and that's sad. So you need to revise previous classes and understand what is written over here on your own. I came back to this slide only for pointing one specific last line. गार्ग्यस्य इति केवलम् आदरार्थं पूजार्थं ग्रहणम्, अत्र विकल्पः न इष्यते इति व्याख्यानात् स्पष्टम्. So in general, when Acharya's name is taken like Lopashaakalyasya, the Acharya's name indicates an option. On the other hand, here Gargyasya iti kevalam pujartham grahanam krutamasti iti sarvam व्याख्यानात् स्पष्टी भवति. Let's go to this Oto Gargyasya. Vyakhyana means not my Vyakhyana. You look at Kashikar commentary, Kaumudi. So, Nityarthaha ayam arambhaha Gargya grahanam pujartham. Same over here. Yakarasya nityam lopaha syat Gargya grahanam pujartham. So, Acharyasya grahanam kevalam adarartham pujartham atra asti. So, that takes care of Lopashaakalyasya and Oto Gargyasya. The last sutram for the yakara lopa is hali sarvesham bho bhago agho apurvasya avarna purvasya. So as I mentioned, sarvesham has two meanings. You can actually extract two meanings out of it. Sarvesham ityukte bho bhago agho apurvasya avarna purvasya sarvesham. Sorry, bho bhago agho purvasya avarna purvasya sarvesham. Or a better interpretation is sarvesham acharyanam matena. Because in Hali Sarvesham, you can actually bring the anuvritti of bho bhago agho apurvasya. And once that anuvritti is brought in, Sarvesham becomes redundant for representing that component. So then Sarvesham is used to represent Sarvesham acharyanam matena. So as I mentioned, as a standalone sutra, you can take either way. But once the anuvritti of bho bhago agho apurvasya comes, Sarvesham is better fitting for Sarvesham acharyanam matena. So Hali Sarvesham, Padacheda, Anuvritti, Adhikara, and so on, you can take a look at it. Tadanta Vidhi and so on. Now I am not going to spend time on it. Sarvesham ityukte Sarvesham Acharyanam matena Padante Vidyamananam Bhoya Bhagoya Aghoya Aya Aya. So Bho Bhago Agho Apurvasya Etesham Yakarasya Halvarni Pare Nityam Lopaha Bhavati यद्यपि अत्र हल् इति उक्तमस्ति तथापि सामान्यरूपेण हश्वर्णे परे इत्येव अत्र अर्थः स्वीकर्तव्यः. सो भोयजनाः बिकम्स् भोजनाः, भगोय देवाः भगो देवाः, अघोय राक्षसाः अघो राक्षसाः, देवाय गच्छन्ति देवा गच्छन्ति इत्यादीनि अत्र उदाहरणानि. You cannot have the example of ह्रस्व अकार because ह्रस्व अकारात् अनन्तरं हश्वर्णः अस्ति चेत् तत्र य एव न भवति. So if you have ह्रस्व akara plus hash letter, a is converted to u by the sutram hashicha. So you cannot have the udharanam of ह्रस्व akara. So aya iti kevalam atra udharana rupena likhitamasti. Tasya udharana सूत्रार्थ रूपेण लिखितमस्ति तस्य उदाहरणं न लभ्यते. You have भोय भगोय अघोय and आय अत्र हल् वर्णे परे इत्युक्ते हश् वर्णे परे अत्र नित्यं लोपः भवति. Any questions on these three sutras that have generated the lopa? If not, then let's take a small break. I'm here if you want to ask any questions. Otherwise, we will meet in like 5 minutes. So 9:01 p.m. or 9:31 p.m., 9:32 p.m. let's say. 9:32 a.m. for those who are in India and 9:02 p.m. for those who are here. Ratnakar Mohoday.
My
Namaste.
voice is audible to you?
My voice is audible, yes.
Yeah. Very primary fundamental question. With all due excuses and due regards, Acharya. Normally, you have been mentioning Tadanta Vidhi and Tadadi Vidhi. The term Vidhi denotes any karya that takes place between Prakriti and Pratyaya or between two Varnas or between two Padas. Is that so?
No, vidhi is a very general term which is used for indicating process. So, or rule. So, a tadanta process applies or a tadanta rule applies. Iti artha.
And similarly, like this is either Adesha, Agama, Lopa, or all these are combined to are known as
Adesha vidhi, lopa vidhi, and so on. Very general.
And for this Tadadi vidhi and Tadanta,
like in mathematics, you have the word operation, right? Anything plus minus is operation. That's a vidhi.
And as an example, Tadanta vidhi and Tadadi vidhi in this particular sutra, like Adyantau Takitau, there the tit is Adi vidhi and kit is Antya vidhi.
So that is not wrong, but you don't use terms like that. Because it's explicitly told as an agama. So you say Adyavayavaha and Antyavayavaha. I mean, there is nothing wrong in saying it is vidhi, but it's very unnatural to say like that. Okay, very specific terms are used in the commentaries.
And all these days, in fact, Visarga Sandhi is somewhat an easier Sandhi when compared to other Sandhis. But when I look at it, so many concepts are involved in this. Now only I could understand. Fine, thanks so much. It's really heavy on me today as far as this class is concerned.
I mean, I understand revision is the only one. Grammar is definitely.
Correct. Namaste.
Reshma ji.
I have one question about yesterday's homework. So in the Vishnu Sahasranam that you given, so after Visarga, there are two options, like there is a Visarga se lopa, or there is only a Sakar or Shakar generating. So which is expected to be written?
Both,
because
you can write both. You can write a slash or you can just write two answers, like rewrite the same shloka in two different ways. So any adesha other than Visarga getting converted to Visarga should be written.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
I'll wait for a few minutes, 3-4 minutes. If there are any questions, I can take. Otherwise, we'll continue. Okay, welcome back. Let's start. So, regarding our matrix, we completed the Visargadesha one quadrant yesterday and the Yakaradesha, the second quadrant, just before the break. Two more quadrants are remaining. Padantaru ityasya ukaradeshaha, which is a specific adesha only when there is akara present before padantaru. So, ru इत्यस्याम अवस्थायाम अग्रे अविद्यते नो चेत हश्वर्णः विद्यते चेत उकारादेशः भवति. So that's the third one, and the fourth one, the simplest one, is rephe pare r ityasya lopah bhavati. So that one we'll take at the end. Right now let us focus on padantaru ityasya ukaradeshah. So hrasva akarat anantaram vidyamanasya padant sakarasya ससजुषोरुः इति त्रिपादि सूत्रेण रु आदेशे कृते ततः रु इत्यस्य सपाद सप्ताध्याय्याः सूत्राभ्याम उकारादेशः विधीयते. So I usually don't write this Tripadi and Sapada Saptadhe, but this is the contrast that I want to highlight. This question was already asked that Rasvakaradhanantaram Vidyamanasya Padanta Sakarasya Tripadi Sutrena Rutve Krute Tadanantaram Sapada Saptadhyayaha Sutrabhyam Ukaradesha Vidyate. So you have Atoro Rapluta Daplute, that is for the case of Rasva Akara. Like Ramas plus Atra becomes Rama, Ru Atra becomes Rama, Ra Atra becomes Rama, O Atra. And obviously Guna will happen later. And Hashicha is for the Hush letter. So two components. Remember, Ash was divided into three groups: A, Akara Bhinna Swara, and Hush. For A, the sutram is Atoro Ruplutadaplute. For Akara Bhinna Swara, it is the Yakara Desha happening by Bho Bhago Gho Purvasya Yoshi. And for the Hush letter, it is again the next sutram, Hashicha. So the example is Ramaru gacchati, Ramar gacchati, Ramu gacchati. In both these cases, whenever there is an ukaradesha happening, there is an akara before that. So that always the configuration will be a plus u. So edadrushe ukaradeshe krute tatah ad gunah ittenena gunaikadeshaha. So Ramo gacchati, atrapi Ramo atra. तदनंतरम पूर्व रूप संधि शक्यः चेत करणीयः. So Rama plus Rama u atra. You do a guna ekadesha Ramo atra. You do eng of padantadati purva rupam Ramotra. And Rama u gacchati. Here only gunadesha happens. Ramo gacchati. There is no need of, or there is no scope for the purva rupa sandhi. So with this, let's come to the question. अतोरोरप्लुतादप्लुते तथा च हशिच इति सपात सप्ताध्याय्याः सूत्रद्वयम्. एतयोः प्रयोगः ससजुषोरुः इत्यस्मादनन्तरं कथं सम्भवति? ससजुषोरुः इत्यनेन कृतः ऋत्वादेशः एतयोः सूत्रयोः कृते असिद्धः स्यात् किल? Anybody wants to answer this question? This was discussed very briefly in the class of Asiddhatva. Very briefly. I mentioned I'll talk about it later in the course, and that later is today. But anybody wants to give a shot? Okay, no hands. So let's start. So Rutvadeshaha etayoho sutrayoho krute asiddhaha syat kila. So the Acharya says, see the big reply, let's go slowly. Satyam. So doubt is valid. It's not a nonsense doubt. Parantu अतोरोरप्लुतादप्लुते तथा च हशि च एतयोः सूत्रयोः प्रयोगः केवलं त्रिपाद्याः ऋत्वप्रकरणस्य सूत्राणाम् अनन्तरम् एव सम्भवति, अन्येन केनापि मार्गेण न सम्भवति. So these sutras 61113 and 61114 are quite special. तेषां तयोः प्रयोगः केवलं ऋत्वप्रकरणाद् अनन्तरं भवति. Now, when we say Rutva Prakaranam, it is not necessarily only Sasajushoruhu. It is those Rutva Prakaranas. Remember, there are two Rutva Prakaranas, both in Tripadi, 8266 onwards and then 831 onwards. So, two different Rutva Prakaranas. Whichever Rutva Prakarana it is, Tena Tatra Ru Adeshe Krute. Tadanantaram Tasya Ru Ityasya Ukaradeshartham Idam Sutra Dvayam Pravartate. So, the Sutras Atoro Rapluta, Daplute and Hashicha are for Ru only. And that Ru is generated by Tripadi. So Tripadyaha Rutva Prakaranasya Sutranam Anantaram eva sambhavati annena kenapi margena sambhavati. Ityukte 8266 Sasajushoruhu iti sutram. Tatha cha तत्समीपे विद्यमानानि ऋत्वप्रकरणस्य अन्यानि अपि सूत्राणि अतोरोरप्लुतादप्लुते तथा च हसि च इत्येतयोः सूत्रयोः आश्रयरूपेण कार्यं कुर्वन्ति. The two sutras अतोरोरप्लुतादप्लुते and हसि च are based upon the sutras of Rutva Prakaranam. Unless the Rutva happens, unless the first floor is built, second cannot be built. So second floor uses the first floor as the Ashraya. So unless Rutva is generated, you cannot use 61113 and 61114. So the Rutva Prakaranam is the Ashraya, is the one that gives the scope, is the one that gives the place of execution for 61113 and 61114. So Rutva Prakaranasya Sutrani 61113 तथा 61114 इत्येतयोः सूत्रयोः आश्रयरूपेण कार्यं कुर्वन्ति. अस्यां स्थितौ असिद्धत्वस्य नियमम् उपयुज्य एतयोः सूत्रयोः प्रति ऋत्वस्य असिद्धत्वं स्वीक्रियते. एते सूत्रे प्रति, प्रति requires a द्वितीया, so एते सूत्रे प्रति ऋत्वस्य असिद्धत्वं स्वीक्रियते. नो चेत् यू कैन से एतयोः सूत्रयोः सम्बन्धेन ऋत्वस्य असिद्धत्वं स्वीक्रियते. तर्हि, so I forgot about my grammatical corrections, let's go back to the context. So in such a case यदा आश्रयरूपेण कार्यं कुर्वन्ति तदा असिद्धत्वस्य नियमम् उपयुज्य एतयोः सूत्रयोः सम्बन्धेन ऋत्वस्य असिद्धत्वं यदि स्वीक्रियते तर्हि किं भवेत्? 61113 and 61114 will never see any root, because the only root is created by Tripadi, and then 61113 and 61114 will be completely useless. But Panini Maharshi cannot write useless sutras in Ashtadhyayi. So ete dve sutre prayojana rahite eva bhavishyatah तथा मा भूत अतः अत्र असिद्धत्वस्य उल्लंघनम अनुमन्यते. अस्यैव निर्देशः व्याकरणशास्त्रे आश्रयात् सिद्धत्वम्. Why is the Tripadi sutras of the Rutva Prakaranam siddha towards 61113 and 61114? It is Ashrayat Siddhatvam. What is Ashrayat Siddhatvam? Sapada Saptadhyayi Sutrasya Ashraya Rupena Pravartamanani Tripadi Sutrani. Not random Tripadi Sutras. Only those which create a foundation. Ashraya Rupena Pravartamanani Tripadi Sutrani. Tam सपाद सप्ताध्यायीं प्रति सिद्धानि एव स्वीक्रियाणि. तम is not needed. सपाद सप्ताध्यायीं प्रति सिद्धानि एव स्वीकर्तव्यानि. Again, siddha not for the entire sapada saptadhyayi, but for those particular sutras whose ashraya is being generated from Tripadi. So in this particular context, amum eva niyamam ashritya ससजुषोरुः इति सूत्रम् अतोररप्लुतादप्लुते तथा च हसि च इत्येतयोः आश्रयरूपेण कार्यं करोति. अतः अत्र आश्रयात् सिद्धत्वस्य नियमं स्वीकृत्य एतयोः सूत्रयोः विषय संदर्भेण त्रिपादी सूत्राणां विशेषरूपेण केवलं ऋत्वप्रकरणस्य सूत्राणां सिद्धत्वम् एव स्वीकृतम् अस्ति. Any questions on this? Anything not clear? Now there is yet another question that the student asks, and I want to see if anybody of you asks it, because there is something hidden in this argument, some fishy thing that is hidden over here. Let's see if you can find it out. Whatever I have explained is correct. There is nothing wrong. There is a logical fallacy over here, nothing grammatically wrong. But there is a logical fallacy over here, and the student is going to point out that fallacy. So let me repeat the argument if you want to think once again. That अतोरोरप्लुतादप्लुते and हसि च एतयोः प्रयोगः केवलं ऋत्वप्रकरणस्य अनन्तरम् एव भवति. अतः यदि ऋत्वप्रकरणम् एतयोः सूत्रयोः कृते असिद्धं स्वीक्रियते तर्हि एतयोः सूत्रयोः प्रयोगस्य अवकाशः एव विनश्येत्. तर्हि पाणिनिः यूस्लेस् अनुपयोगी सूत्रद्वयं किमर्थं स्थापयेत् इति चिन्तयित्वा अत्र आश्रयात् सिद्धत्वं स्वीकृतम् अस्ति. पूर्णिमा भगिनी.
Namaste Mahodaya. Then why those sutras are not kept in Tripadi only? Why they are in Sapada Saptadhyayi?
So the next question is very good. Parantu यदि अतोरोरप्लुतादप्लुते हसि च इत्येतयोः प्रयोगः त्रिपाद्याः ऋत्वप्रकरणस्य सूत्राणामनन्तरमेव सम्भवति तर्हि मूलतः एते द्वे सूत्रे सपादसप्ताध्याय्यां किमर्थं स्थापिते? त्रिपाद्याः ऋत्वप्रकरणस्य सूत्राणामनन्तरम् एतयोः स्थापनां करोतु. So keep it after tripadi. What's the big deal? So yes, anybody, what is the big deal? Does anybody want to answer this? Or does anybody know, or anybody wants to guess? What's the big deal? You are only asking question and you are only giving answer, huh? Purnima Bhagini.
So just a guess, sir. So
Okay.
maybe anuvrittyartham, anurutti something is.
that is one of that is an answer which is always valid everywhere in Ashtadhyayi. Alpaksharatvartham anuruttyartham idam kurtam asti. And in fact, there is yet another Ashrayat Siddhatam that I am going to discuss towards the end of the class. There exactly same question is asked. Why Ashrayat Siddhatam is needed? Why not put that sutram in Tripadi? And the answer is anuruttyartham. But here there is a different answer. But good, this is a good point, and there will be another Ashrayat Siddhatam towards the end of the class where I'll come back to this point. But for now, anybody? So anuvritti is definitely not the answer over here. Anything else? So observe what happens in the Reshma ji.
I'm not sure, but maybe because this Pluta and other things are discussed here.
Okay, but then Pluta is in Tripadi, right? So that might actually make more sense to put it in Tripadi. Because Pluta and so on are actually generated in Tripadi. Do you remember? We have discussed the Guru Randruto, Pracham and so on, Sutra, Duradhutecha. So then it probably is a better reason to keep it in Tripadi. So then why in Sapada Saptadhyayi? Somebody seems to have typed answer over here. You want to talk? Alak Nandaji, who is this? You want to talk? Or okay. If you raise hands, I'll let you speak. Otherwise, I'll discuss. Uchita.
All other sutras regarding swara sandhis are in 6th chapter adhyay.
But this is not a swara sandhi. This is Rutva. That is a good point, and that is almost going closer to the answer. But this is technically not a swara sandhi, right? This is Rutvadesha. So why is the Adesha on the Rutva kept in Tripadi? Okay, let's not spend too much time. Let's actually go to the answer. So यदि अतोरोरप्लुतादप्लुते तथा हसि चैत्येतयोः प्रयोगः त्रिपाद्याः ऋत्वप्रकरणस्य सूत्राणाम् अनन्तरं सम्भवति तर्हि मूलतः एते द्वे सूत्रे सपादसप्ताध्याय्यां किमर्थं स्थापिते? The answer is, if you recollect the prakriya, after applying atororapluta and hashicha, you have to apply sutras like ad gunaha and eng of padantadati. So you say rama plus ra plus atra. The sapada saptadhyay sutram converts rama to u to atra, and that's not the end of the story. You have to apply ad gunaha to make ramotra. Then you have to apply eng of padantadati to make ramotra, and that all is in sapada saptadhyayi. So you have to enter sapada saptadhyayi. So atororapluta and hashicha, keeping them in Tripadi does not solve the problem, because after atororapluta and hashicha you will have to jump back. So atororapluta tatha hashicha ittetayoho prayogadanantaram swarasandhi. Somebody was saying, as I mentioned, it goes close to the answer. Swarasandhehe sutranam upayogah ishyate. Ete asyam sthitau. If you do keep these two sutras in the Tripadi, then again the asiddhatva is going to kick in, and then whatever ra is converted to u by the sutras atororapluta and hashicha in Tripadi will not be visible to sapada saptadhyayi. Remember, in case of Ramar asit, in this particular example, ra becomes ya. Ya undergoes a lopa by lopashakalya. So that all transformation is sitting in the Tripadi. After lopashakalya from Tripadi is executed, Rama asid ityatra sapada saptadhyayah sutraihi swarah sandhi na sambhavati. In exactly the same way, If you have Rama plus Ru plus Atra, if that conversion of R to U was in Tripadi, then that conversion would not be seen by the Sandhi Sutras of the Sapada Saptadhyayi, and you might not be able to do Ma plus U as Mo. So, यदि एते सूत्रे त्रिपाद्यां स्थाप्येते तर्हि ताभ्यां कृतम उत्वम आद्गुणः इत्यस्य कृते असिद्धं स्यात् is the answer. Is there any problem with this answer? Anybody wants to find out? That's why I said it's going to take 25 minutes for all this entire discussion. Is there any problem with this answer? The Chhatra thinks about a problem with this answer. The Chhatra says this is not a valid answer because what you are doing is you are just putting the problem in a different plate. So katham asiddham syat atrapi ashrayat siddhatvam svikurmaha. So he says the problem is atoror. See what you are doing. You are jumping from Tripadi to Sapada Saptadhyayi to reach Atorora Plutada Plute and Hashicha. Put Atorora Plutada Plute and Hashicha in Tripadi, and the next jump to the Adguna Sutra can be done from Tripadi to Sapada Saptadhyayi. So whatever new terminology of Ashrayat Siddhatvam you were talking about, Atorora Plutada Plute and Hashicha, use the same complex terminology. This time use it from jumping the Atorora Plutada Plute and Hashicha to the Adguna Sutra. So keep Atorora Plutada Plute and Hashicha in Tripadi after the Rutva. So there is a normal flow. You just like the way in Lopa Shakalyasya, you do Rutva and then you do Lopa after that, and Lopa Shakalyasya is situated afterwards. In the same way, do the same thing here, do Rutva, then there will be another Tripadi Sutram called Atorora Plutada Plute and Hashicha. That Sutram, there you do the Ukaradesha, and then use your logic of Ashrayat Siddhatvam to jump back to Sapada Saptadhyayi and do Adgunaha and Ing of Padantadati and so on. So the student says, Kathama Siddham Syat, Atrapi Ashrayat Siddhatvam Svikurmaha. Adgunaha iti Sapada Saptadhyayah Krute त्रिपाद्यां स्थापिते अतोरोरप्लुतादप्लुते तथा हशिच इति सूत्रे आश्रयात् सिद्धे स्तः इति मत्वा एताभ्यां सूत्राभ्याम् इत्युक्ते अतोरोरप्लुतादप्लुते तथा हशिच इत्येताभ्यां कृतस्य उकारादेशस्य then you jump back to Tripadi, jump back to Sapada Saptadhyayi. Adguna ityenena gunekadeshah agre karotu guna kriyatam etadrisham kurmaschit kaha doshaha. So you anyway want to use a fancy terminology called Ashrayat Siddhatvam. Don't use it for jumping from Sasajushoruhu to Atorora Plutada Plute. Use it for jumping from Atorora Plutada Plute to Adgunaha. What is the problem? Anybody? Is the question first of all clear? If the question is not clear, raise the hand and I'll explain the question again. So hopefully the question is clear. Anybody wants to try out the answer? And there is a reason why I asked this question. Purnima Bhagini.
Mohdaya, then maybe Adgunaha will become Siddha, will be applicable everywhere.
No, only for Atorura Plutada Plute and Hashicha. That's what we are saying. Use Ashrayat Siddhatvam only for making Atorura Plutada Plute and Hashicha as visible to Adgunaha. Not everywhere. Not other cases like Bala Asita and so on. Or I mean Savaradirgha and so on. Sorry, anybody? So the reason I explained this is because if you are getting this question and if you are not able to answer this question, then it means you have not understood Ashrayat Siddhatvam at all. So Acharya says, Are, if you are asking this question, yadi tvaya ayam prashna pruchhate, tarhi Ashrayat Siddhatvam ityasya arthaha eva navagataha tvaya. Yatra kutrapi Ashrayat Siddhatvam svikartum na shakyate. You cannot randomly jump from Sapada Saptadhyayi, randomly jump from Tripadi to Sapada Saptadhyayi and call it or tag it under the fancy name of Ashrayat Siddhatvam. Ashrayat Siddhatvam is not a blanket rule exception that allows you to jump from Tripadi to Sapada Saptadhyayi. So what is exactly Ashrayat Siddhatvam? Punarekavaram vadami dhyanam datva shru. He says, please understand carefully what I am saying. Yatra Sapada Saptadhyayi sutrasya prayogaha केवलं त्रिपादी सूत्राणामन्तरमेव संभवति भिन्न मार्गेण नैव संभवति. That is the ashraya. So tatra eva sapada saptadhyayi sutrasya krute तानि त्रिपादी सूत्राणि आश्रयात् सिद्धानि स्वीक्रियन्ते. सो अतोरोरप्लुदादप्लुते इत्यस्य प्रयोगः त्रिपाद्याः ऋत्वप्रकरणस्य सूत्राणाम् अनन्तरमेव सम्भवति. There is no other way to apply अतोरोरप्लुदादप्लुते and हसि च. Therefore, Tripadi Sutras act as the ashraya towards Atororaplutada-plute. But can you apply the same argument if you move Atororaplutada-plute to Tripadi? Now we are saying I will move Atororaplutada-plute to Tripadi and I will use Ashrayat Siddhatvam to jump from Atororaplutada-plute to Adgunaha. Before you do that, ask yourself, is Adgunaha purely dependent on Atororaplutada-plute? Is Atororaplutada-plute 100% Ashraya of Adguna? Can Adguna never be applied without Atororaplutada-plute? So Adguna ityasa sandarbena tatha vaktum na shakyate. Adgunah ityasa sutrasya prayogaha bahunam sutranam anantaram sambhavati. If you take a simple example like Suryodayaha, in that prakriya, Surya plus Udaya, there is no Atororaplutada-plute, no Hashicha and so on. Direct Guna Sandhi Adgunaha is being used. So Adgunaha cannot be considered an Ashraya dependent for Atororaplutada-plute and Hashicha. Atororaplutada-plute tatha Hashicha इत्येतयोः सूत्रयोः आश्रयात् सिद्धत्वम् आद्गुणः इत्यस्य कृते वक्तुं न शक्यते. So if you move Atororaplutada-plute and Hashicha to Tripadi, a reverse jump on the account of Ashrayat Siddhatvam is not possible. The only way to do Ashrayat Siddhatvam is to keep Atororaplutada-plute and Hashicha in Sapada Saptadhyayi. That is dependent purely on the Rutva. So from Rutva to Atororaplutada-plute, that Ashrayat Siddhatvam is possible. And now once you enter Sapada Saptadhyayi, the entire Sutra Patha is open to you. You can easily proceed with Adgunaha and Inga Padantadati. So Atasya Yadi Atororaplutada-plute अथवा हशिच इति सूत्रे त्रिपाद्यां स्थाप्येते तर्हि एताभ्यां सूत्राभ्यां कृतः उकारादेशः आद्गुणः इत्येतं प्रति असिद्धः एव भवेत्. अस्यां स्थितौ एताभ्यां सूत्राभ्याम् उकारादेशे कृते ततः आद्गुणः इत्यनेन अग्रे इष्टः गुणैकादेशः नैव सम्भवेत्. अयं गुण एकादेशः अस्माभिः अत्र इष्यते. अस्य गुणैकादेशस्य प्राप्त्यर्थम् अतोरोरप्लुतादप्लुते तथा च हशिच इत्येते सूत्रे सपादसप्ताध्याय्याम् एव आवश्यके. एतत् सर्वं विचिन्त्य पाणिनिमहर्षिभिः एते द्वे सूत्रे सपादसप्ताध्याय्यां स्थापिते स्तः. रत्नाकर महोदय.
So, Acharya, in fact, Atororaplutada-plute and Hashicha, they are, the question of these two sutras arises only after Rutva Prakarana. If there was no Rutva Prakarana, the question of these two sutras might not come into existence. Only after Rutva Prakarana, as these two things come around, that was how I think the answer is given, if I am right.
Correct.
That is what the Ashrayatva is.
That is exactly what the Ashrayatva means. Correct.
Yeah. Thanks.
Awesome. Any further questions? So if the argument was complex, go back and listen to it. There is a homework question on this. This is not optional. Everybody in the course needs to understand and appreciate. Appreciation is optional. Understanding is compulsory. So you have to understand this argument and write it in the homework. With this, let's now start study of the two sutras, Atororaplutada-plute and Hashicha. Atororaplutada-plute, see how the sutra is constructed. Attaha. So, Rasva akarat parasya taparakarnam. Roho ityukte ru ityasya. Aplutat akarat parasya. Aplute akare pare. So, ataha roho aplutad aplute. Apluta, we'll keep that aside. I'll explain why it is written. But for now, akarat parasya, akare pare, and then there is ru who is sandwiched. So अस्यां स्थितौ किं भवति? अतोरोरप्लुतादप्लुते इत्यनेन उकारादेशः भवति. So all that material which is not in the sutram comes as an anuvritti. So ukaradesha comes as an anuvritti from ruta uta. Eng of padantadati from that ati comes as an anuvritti. You can read anuvritti sahitam sutram and so on. So as I mentioned, we have studied more than 100 sutras. As we enter the next section, Subanta Prakaranam, Karakas and so on, Tiganta Prakaranam, Kurdanta, I will not spend time on Anuvritti Adhikara, Anuvritti Saitam Sutram. It will be there on the slide for you to understand. Important bits I will speak, but otherwise Adyadesha, Antyadesha, Sarvadesha, Tadanta Vidhi, Visheshana, Vishesha, Shashti, Panchami, Saptami is all now expected to be understood on your own. So apluta akarat parasya ru ityasya apluta akare pare ukaradeshah bhavati. Udaharanam Rama ru atra, Rama u atra. A and a, the ru sandwich between them is Rama u atra. This is ashrayat siddhatvam. Agre adguna ityena gunaikadeshe krute Ramo atra. Eng of padantadatityene purure rupaikadeshe krute Ramotra iti siddhati. Dalakrutyam. अतः इत्यत्र तपरकरणं किमर्थं? सो व्हाई ओनली ह्रस्वाकार? आकारात् परस्य रु इत्यस्य उत्वं मा भूत्. अति, सो अति इज द पर निमित्त, दैट इज आल्सो तपरकरणम. एंग पदान्तादति इत्यस्मात् अनुवृत्तिः अस्ति. सो अति इत्यत्र तपरकरणं किमर्थं? आकारे परे उत्वं मा भूत्. सो देवाय प्लस अत्र और रामय प्लस आसीत्. इन दीज केसेस यू डू नॉट गेट द उत्व. Roho iti kimartham? See, roho, it is only for the padanta repha generated from ru. So, kevalam ru ityasmat nirmitasya ra ityasya kruteva idam sutram. Ro bhinnasya rephasya utvam ma bhut. So, punar plus atra, there is a repha. It is sandwiched between akara. But is this repha made up of ru? No. Therefore, atra ukaradesha na bhavati. Roho iti kimartham? Ru bhinna rephasya utvam ma bhut. See, these are the things that now you will understand immediately, because we spent time in the yesterday's class to understand two different pathways in which a padanta repha can be generated, one from ru and one from others. So these minor points which were discussed as a background will be applicable everywhere in the two classes. So ro iti kimartham, tadanantaram utta iti vidheyatve api taparakaranam kimartham. So we have utta coming. Go back to the previous slide. Problem with this controls. Atra ukaradeshaha ityatra utta iti taparakaranam krutamasti. So why is a taparakaranam created? It is a vidheya. So utta is the vidheya. Vidheyena savarnagranam tadrisham api na bhavati. Anudit savarnasya cha apratyayah. So apratyayah an ityukte avidhiyamanaha an savarnagranam karoti. Ukaraha vidhiyamanaha asti. अत्र तथापि तपरकरणं किमर्थं कृतमस्ति? केवलम् उच्चारणार्थं कृतमस्ति इति इदानीम् उत्तरं स्वीकुर्मः. There is a little more to it, but we will not go about it. We will not think about it right now. So उत इति विधेयत्वे अपि तपरकरणं किमर्थं? उच्चारण सौलभ्यार्थम्. And अप्लुतात् तथा अप्लुते, अप्लुतात् तथा अप्लुते इति किमर्थं? So the reason is that the pluta swara is generated by tripadi. Tripadya praptaha plutaha Ashtadhyayasya prathama padasya sutranam krute samanya rupena siddha asti. So in some cases, by doing antaranga bahiranga discussion, we made it visible, we made it siddha. So there was discussion about pluta pragriya achinityam. At that point, we talked about antaranga bahiranga argument, and we said that pluta is siddha towards the corresponding ach sandhi prakarana sutras, but otherwise in general that rutva is asiddha. Therefore, in cases like susrota, where there is a pluta akara plus ru, or in cases like payaru plus agnidatta, where there is a pluta akara after the ru, in these cases the pluta is generated by tripadi, that is asiddha for sapada saptadhyayi. So sapada saptadhyayi will still see akara over here, and in presence of that akara, ru might incorrectly get converted to u. We do not want that. Atah atra spashta rupena apluta iti likhitamasti. So if there is a pluta akara it will be visible, and this current sutram of ukaradesha will not kick in. So susrota ru इत्यत्र अकारात् परस्य प्लुत अकारात् परस्य रू इत्यस्य पयरु अग्निदत्त इत्यत्र प्लुत अकारे परे सुस्रोतरु अत्र, दिस इज द फुल वर्ड, सुस्रोतरु अत्र इत्यत्र प्लुत अकारात् परस्य रू इत्यस्य, नो चेत् पयरु अग्निदत्त इत्यत्र प्लुत अकारात् पूर्वं विद्यमानस्य रू इत्यस्य अनेन सूत्रेण उकारादेशः न भवेत्। वस्तुतः प्लुतः अत्र असिद्धः, अतः अत्र अनेन सूत्रेण ह्रस्वः अकारः एव दृश्येत, परन्तु तादृशे ह्रस्व अकारे सति उकारादेशस्य प्रसक्तिः उकारादेशस्य प्राप्तिः स्यात्, तत् तथा उकारादेशः मा भूत्, अतः अत्र साक्षात् अप्लुत इति ग्रहणं कृतम् अस्ति। This is one argument. There is yet another counter argument to this. The counter argument says that the pluta which is generated by Tripadi is considered siddha for entire 6.1 in general. So there is a different argument which says that pluta generated by Tripadi is considered siddha for a significant portion of Sapada Saptadhyayi. Not just that ach sandhi prakaranam sutram of antaranga bahiranga, but a bigger section of Sapada Saptadhyayi, and if that paksha is considered, then you do not need aplutad and aplute in this sutram. So a group of grammarians actually think that aplutad aplute in this sutram is not needed, but that's an advanced argument, we'll not go into it. For now, just understand that in general, except for those specific ach sandhi sutras, in general, the pluta generated by the Tripadi is asiddha towards Sapada Saptadhyayi. Therefore, Sapada Saptadhyayi would only see Hraswa Akara, and it might end up in doing Ukaradesha. Tadrishah Ukaradesha atra na ishyate, atah atra साक्षात् अप्लुते इति निर्देशः कृतः अस्ति। अनेन निर्देशेन तत्र असिद्धः सन् प्लुतः अपि अत्र अस्य सूत्रस्य कृते सिद्धः एव स्वीक्रियते। So that's atorora plutada plute, and the counterpart is hashicha. So atora plutada plute was for a plus ru plus a, hashicha is for a plus ru plus hash letter. So you can read anuvrittis and so on your own. Apluta akarat parasya ru ityasya hashvarane pare ukaradeshah bhavati. So Rama ru gacchati ityatra Rama u gacchati. So ru is now sandwiched between rasva akara on the left, it is apluta again, and a hush letter on the right. So Rama gacchati agre ad guna ityanena gunaika adeshe krute Ramo gacchati iti rupam siddhyati. So that completes the third quadrant, ru ityasya ukara adeshaha. Any questions on this? Somebody is commenting it's not possible in 1 year. 5 years will go in the study of thorough understanding is correct. Even one lifetime is not sufficient for understanding Vyakarana. And believe me, this is Ashtadhyayi Parichaya. So what I am teaching is the simplest one. It's a small portion of Laghu Kaumudi. So even if this seems more complex, then what would be Laghu Kaumudi and what would be the actual Kaumudi? So constant study and passion is very important. Otherwise, these things won't retain in your brain if you don't study regularly. That's why please study regularly. Okay, so that completes the discussion of three quadrants. Visargadesha hyastane varge, tadanantaram yakaradesha adya laghu viramat purvam, tadanantaram ukaradesha idanim laghu viramat anantaram asmabhi adhita. Last bit is remaining. Rephasya rephe pare lopaha. रेफस्य संहितायां रेफे परे रोरि इत्यनेन लोपः भवति। अयं नियमः सर्वप्रकारकस्य रेफस्य कृते प्रयुज्यते. So remember, रेफस्य रेफे परे लोपः was in the left side of the diagram. So left side bottom square. So सर्वप्रकारस्य रेफस्य कृते प्रयुज्यते. More interesting thing is लोपे कृते tasmat purva varnaha. So whatever r is being removed, repha is being removed, tasmat purva varnaha a i u asti chet तस्य दीर्घादेशः भवति। ढ्रलोपे पूर्वस्य दीर्घोणः इत्यनेन तस्य दीर्घादेशः भवति। सो रोरि इत्यनेन रेफस्य रेफे परे लोपः, सो पुनर्रमते, सो यू हैव र प्लस र इज रिमूव्ड, पुनर्रमते, and then ढ्रलोपे पूर्वस्य दीर्घोण इत्यनेन दीर्घादेशः संभवति, न becomes na, compulsory, not optional. So na becomes na, you have punaramate. Now here is another place where you can actually see ashrayat siddhatvam. Rori ityanena refasya refe lopure lopaha is in tripadi, and then ढ्रलोपे पूर्वस्य दीर्घोणः, where a dirgha is done, is in sapada saptadhyayi. So yet another ashrayat siddhatvam. I will talk about the purpose of that again after a few slides. But again another observation that there is an ashrayat siddhatvam over here. So what is the example? Punarramate becomes punaramate, punaramate. Balar ramante. Atra balaya ramante. इति यकारस्य अपि विधानं संभवति, परन्तु यकारस्य असिद्धत्वात् रोरि इत्येव प्रवर्तते इति केषाञ्चित् वैयाकरणानां मतम्. सो बालार रमन्ते, one possibility is to apply भो भगो अघो अपूर्वस्य योषि, convert balaya ramante, and hali sarvesham will get rid of that yakar, balar ramante. That is absolutely an acceptable path. But by purely rules of sapada saptadhyayi and tripadi, by rules of asiddhatva, you can actually remove ra in presence of ra by rori, saying that it just wins over bho bhago by a margin of few sutras, but still rori is a little earlier. So bho bhago ityasya asiddhatvat rori ityeva pravartate iti api atra bahunam केषाञ्चन वैयाकरणानां मतमस्ति. सिद्धांत कौमुदी and so on, I think just use the bho bhago ago over here. So either way is fine. Even on the previous slides in the slide deck, I would have given the same example for bho bhago ago. There's nothing big issue over there. Either way, either it is yakara lopa or it is repha lopa. Eventually, the final form is the same. मुनिर्रक्षति इत्यत्र रेफस्य रेफे परे लोपे कृते मुनिरक्षति दीर्घे कृते, ढ्रलोपे पूर्वस्य दीर्घण इत्यनेन दीर्घे कृते मुनि रक्षति. शंभुर्राजते शंभुराजते शंभूराजते. Matuhu raksha. So not starting with the visarga, but in that particular configuration, Matuhu raksha. You start with Matru plus Nasa, Shashti Ekvachan plus raksha. Matru plus Nasa becomes Matur. Somehow the prakriya happens. Plus raksha, rephasya rephe pare lopaha, Matu raksha, dirghadeshe, Matu raksha. Anena prakarena atra udaharanani santi, and the only example where this sutram is not applicable is hrasva akarat parasya rephasya. So if you have a plus r like balar and so on, and then there is a r in front, then there is rori ityanena praptasya rutvasya siddhatvat hashicha ityanena utvam eva bhavati. So hashicha is applicable because of this ra is followed by the next ra, and this sutram is in sapada saptadhyayi. Rori is anyway a siddha towards it. So as I mentioned, not everything in sapada tripadi is siddha towards hashicha. It's only the sutras of rutva prakaranam. Rori is not the sutra of rutva prakaranam. It is the lopa prakaranam. So it has no relation with that ashrayat siddhatvam. Therefore atra balar ityatra plus ra ityatra hashicha ityanena utvam eva bhavati. अतः अत्र मनस प्लस रथ इत्यत्र मनरु रथ. So sa becomes ru by sasajushorhu. Manara rath रेफस्य उकारादेशे कृते मनउ रथ मनोरथ. So रेफस्य रेफे परे लोपे कृते मनारथ इति अशुद्धं स्यात्, तथा न भवति. मन प्लस उ प्लस रथ मनोरथ इति अत्र उदाहरणम्. Somebody is asking niramate. We'll talk about it in just 1 minute. So here is the sutram ro ri raha ri. Simple sutram. Lopaha iti anuvartate. Raha ri samhitayam lopaha. Refasya rephe pare lopaha bhavati. This is not only restricted to padanta vidhi. There are some really complex apadanta cases where apadanta refasya rephe pare lopaha api bhavati. But ajargha and so on. But we will not go in that tinganta prakaram at the moment. For now, it's okay to assume it is the padanta vidhi like every other yakara lopa and so on we are talking till now. सो यद्यपि अत्र पदस्य नाधि क्रियते प्रारंभिकस्तरार्थम् अत्र पदस्य इति स्वीकुर्मः. The point to understand is idam sutram rutvat praptasya refasya krute api asti rutvabhinnasya refasya krute api asti. Example, one for rutvat praptam refam, one for, no, both the examples I am giving for rutvat praptam refam. So punarramate, sorry, both the examples are being given for general refa. So punarramate becomes punarramate, and then dirgha will happen, punaramate. And then second one, nirgataha rasaha yasmat saha, nir plus rasaha, nir becomes ni rasa, dirgha deshe krute ni rasa. Similarly, somebody is asking nir plus ramate. So if you have nir plus ramate, it is ni ramate. Let's actually go to the website and see if the code is running correctly. So if you go to the website, Dhatu Patha, let's clean this. Let's use the Rama Dhatu. There is this Ramate, right? Use the Upasarga. See, this plus button is for the Upasarga. Let's use the Upasarga. Nir display results. Ni Ramate. There is a Dirgha Desha. And look at the Prakriya. Nir plus Ramate. You have Ro Ri that creates the Lopa of Ra. And then Dra Lope Purvase Dirghona causes the Ni Ramate. So that's the correct answer. See how beautiful these programs are. So, anyway, coming back to this, so rori ityatra refasya rephe pare lopaha bhavati. And after doing that refa lopa, the previous ana letter a, I, u, ana, purvena nakarena, a, I, u, first Suvasutram, ana letter undergoes a dirgha. The sutra is dhralope purvasya dirghonaha. I am going to talk about the padacheda because it is a little bit unusual. Dhralope purvasya dirghonaha. ढ्रलोपे पूर्वस्य अणः दीर्घः. पूर्वस्य इत्युक्ते तस्माद् रेफात्, यस्य रेफस्य लोपः जातः तस्मात् रेफात् पूर्वस्य अणवर्णस्य दीर्घादेशः भवति. ढ्रलोपे, the sutra is about dhakara lopa and repha lopa. So we are only talking about repha lopa right now, but there is a yet altogether different in the tinganta prakriya or krudanta prakriya. You will see altogether different pathway where a dhakara lopa also happens, and this sutram is overloaded for the dhakara lopa and for the repha lopa. The word dhralopa is very specific. Understand the meaning of the word. Dhralopa does not mean dhakara lopa and repha lopa, but it means dhakarasya lopaha yena krutaha तथा च रेफस्य लोपः येन कृतः सः वर्णः. So understand this. Let me go slow. Dhralopa. How is this word broken down? Dhaha cha raha cha, it is dhrau. So dhr is separately simply dha plus ra. It is a dvandva. Dhrau lopayati saha dhralopaha. So dhakara tatha repha एतयोः लोपं करोति सः वर्णः ढ्रलोपः नाम्ना ज्ञायते. So ढ्रलोपः is a varna, is a letter that removes the dhakara or removes the repha. So dhakarasya lopah no chet refasya lopah yena jayate saha varnah dhralopah ityanena vivakshitah asti. Now who is that letter? The interesting aspect is the sutram that causes the dhakara lopa and the sutram that causes the repha lopa, the ro ri, are sitting next to each other. So we have ro ri over here. The immediate previous sutram is dhode lopaha. That sutram is the one that causes dhakara lopa. Ro ri is the one that causes the repha lopa. So dhakarasya lopaha ढोढे लोपा इति सूत्रेण तत्र निमित्तम अस्ति ढकारः. ढकारस्य ढकारे परे लोपः. रेफस्य लोपः रोरि इति सूत्रेण. So it should be रेफस्य. रेफस्य लोप विधायक सूत्रम रोरि. रेफस्य रेफे परे लोपः. अतः रेफस्य लोपस्य निमित्तमपि रेफः. So in this particular sutram, dhralopa, which means dhakarasya lopasya nimittam, saha dhakaraha eva. Rephasya lopasya nimittam, saha rethaha eva. And therefore, the entire meaning of dhralopaha turns out to be dhakara lopa nimittakaha dhakaraha and repha lopa nimittakaha rephaha. The sutram just says dhakara lopa nimittaka varnaha and repha lopa nimittaka varnaha. But ironically, that varna turns out to be the same because of certain sutras dhode lopa and rori. Rephasya rephe pare lopaha. So repha lopa nimittaka varna repha. And similarly, dhodhe lopaha. Dhakar lopa nimittaka varnaha dhakaraha. Ataha dhakara dhralopaha is dhakara lopa nimittaha dhakaraha and the repha lopa nimittaka rephaha. Dhralope. Now this is saptami. So dhralopaha agre asti chet. Now you see why such a convoluted meaning is created. Dhralopa varnaha agre asti chet. इत्युक्ते ढकारलोपनिमित्तकः ढकारः अग्रे अस्ति चेत् रेफलोपनिमित्तकः रेफः अग्रे अस्ति चेत् पूर्वस्य इत्युक्ते तस्मात् पूर्वम् इदानीं ढ र is removed. So you had ढ plus ढ was removed. R plus R was removed. So now that removal letter nimitta is in front. Tasmad purvasya anvarnasya dirghaha bhavati. So the entire sutrartha now becomes dhralope ityukte dhralope pare lopadanantaram purvasya anvarnasya dirghaha bhavati. So dhakara lopanimittake dhakare pare repha lopanimittake rephe pare tasmat purvasya anvarnasya dirghaha bhavati. Simple examples are very simple. Liha iti dhatuhu, to lick. Liha dhatoho kta pratyay krute. In this entire prakriya you get lidha plus dha. We don't need to worry about this step. At this particular step, at this particular point, there is a dha plus dha. So dhodhe lopa iti dhakara lope. So this first dha is removed. You get lidha. Purvasya anaha dirgha bhavati. Lidha. Muha plus kta. Mudha plus dha. So muha plus kta ityatra, same like liha plus ta. You get mudha plus dha. Dhodhe lopaha. The first dha is removed. The second dha, that is the nimitta, causes the anvarna to become dirgha. So mudha. Finally, punarramate. The rori ityanena rephe lope krute punarramate gives rise to punaramate. Munirrajate. Rori ityanena rephe lope krute munirajate dirghadeshe krute munirajate. So in this particular way, dhodhe lopaha and rori, which are both there in Tripadi 8-3-13 and 8-3-14, dhodhe lopaha and rori, the dhakara lopa and repha lopa is immediately followed by dhralope purvasya dirghonaha. The und letter, which is basically a, e and u, the und letter is removed. Last slide and we will stop. This is again a discussion on the Ashrayat Siddhatvam. So now the student who knows what exactly Ashrayat Siddhatvam is observes the same thing over here and he says, Acharya, atra api rori ityasmat tripadi sutradanantaram dhralope purvase dirghona iti sapada saptadhyayam sutram prayuktam asti. Is this also Ashrayat Siddhatvam? What he's trying to ask is that, is dhralope purvase dirghona completely based on rori and dhodhe lopaha? So 8-3-13 and 8-3-14. So is dhralope purvase dirghona only possible after 8-3-13 and 8-3-14? Is it Ashrayat Siddhat? Are the two sutras of 8-3-13 and 8-3-14 Ashrayat Siddha for dhralope purvase dirghona? And the teacher says, yes, satyam, dhralope purvase dirghona iti sutram kevalam dhodhe lopa tatha rori ityasmadanantaram meva pravartate. Ataha ete dve sutre dhralope purvase dirghona ityasya ashraya rupena karyam kurvantau dhralope purvase dirghona ityasya krute siddhau eva svikriyate. So first step, that 63111 is definitely Ashrayat Siddha towards 8313 and 8314. Now the next question comes. Why keep Dhralope Purvasi Dirghona in 6-3? Why not put it down in the Tripadi? So we asked the same question for Atorora Plutada Plute and Hashisha, and we got a very beautiful answer that the Sandhi Sutras like Adguna and so on need to be executed after that. But here that is not really the case. So when the student asks Dhralope Purvasi Dirghona इत्यत्र सपाद सप्ताध्याय्याः उपस्थितेः किं कारणम्? Is there any other sapada saptadhyayi sutra that is executed after Dhralope Purvasa Dirghona which mandates the presence of Dhralope Purvasa Dirghona in sapada saptadhyayi? Because otherwise you can just put it in Tripadi and then there is no question of Ashrayat Siddhatvam. So this is a very valid question, and then say Acharya says, Vatsa ayameva vishayah chintyaha. ढ्रलोपे पूर्वस्य दीर्घोणः इति सूत्रं सामान्य रूपेण प्रक्रियायाः अंतिम सोपाने एव प्रयुज्यते. In 99% of the cases or 99.99% of the cases, ढ्रलोपे पूर्वस्य दीर्घोणः is the last sutram of your prakriya. केवलं कासुचित् क्लिष्टासु प्रक्रियासु अस्य सूत्रस्य प्रयोगात् अनन्तरं 8315 खरवसानयोर्विसर्जनीयः इति सूत्रस्य प्रयोगः भवति. So some really complicated cases. Let me see if I can quickly find one example. This ajarghaha is what I wanted to see. If you go to this particular prakriya, where is that ajarghaha? This particular prakriya, see how complicated this prakriya is. And then there is Dhralope Purvasya Dirghona. See, Rori, Dhralope Purvasya Dirghona, and then there is Kharavasana Visarjaniya after that. So in 99.9% of the cases, Dhralope is the last sutram. But in such complex prakriya, see how many lines of this prakriya is spanning. But in such complex prakriya, this is just very handful of examples. एतेषु संदर्भेषु किमस्ति, एतासु प्रक्रियासु किमस्ति, अत्र ढ्रलोपे पूर्वस्य दीर्घोणः इति सूत्रस्य अनन्तरं खरवसानयोर्विसर्जनीय इति सूत्रस्य प्रयोगः भवति. But that is also त्रिपादी सूत्रम. So खरवसानयोर्विसर्जनीय इति त्रिपादी सूत्रमेव. अतः ढ्रलोपे पूर्वस्य दीर्घोणः इत्यस्य सूत्रस्य अनन्तरं सपाद सप्ताध्याय्याः कस्यापि सूत्रस्य प्रयोगः न संभवति. अस्यां स्थितौ ढ्रलोपे पूर्वस्य दीर्घोणः इति सूत्रं सपाद सप्ताध्याय्यां किमर्थं स्थापितम् इत्यस्य स्पष्टं कारणं नैव वक्तुं शक्यते. There is no compelling reason for keeping ढ्रलोपे पूर्वस्य दीर्घोणः in सपाद सप्ताध्यायी. It can actually, see, the Dhralope Purvasya Dirghona always works after, if you in fact go to the sutra ordering, you will be able to appreciate more about it. Give me 1 minute till I go back. So see, Dhralope Purvasya Dirghona can only be applied after either Dhodhe Lopaha and Rori, and after Dhralope Purvasya Dirghona, we apply Kharavasana Visarjaniya. So very beautiful sequence, and here in between Rori and Kharavasana Visarjaniya, you can technically put Dhralope Purvasya Dirghona and there will be absolutely no problem anywhere. So Rori तथा च खरवसानेर् विसर्जनीयः इत्येतयोः मध्ये ढ्रलोपे पूर्वस्य दीर्घोण इति संस्थाप्यते चेदपि दोषः नैव स्यात् इति मम चिन्तनं. So that's Acharya is saying, essentially I am saying behind that name. परंतु अस्मिन् विषये व्याख्यानेषु किमपि निर्दिष्टं नैव लब्धं मया. So I have talked with many scholars about this. All of them agree that this particular sutram does not need to be in Sapada Saptadhyayi. There is only one weak reason. I won't call it as a strong reason, but there is only one weak reason for which the Dhralope Purvasya Dirghona is in the Sapada Saptadhyayi, and that's what somebody had mentioned earlier, that maybe for anuvrittis and so on. So ironically, it turns out that this dirgha word which is present in Dhralope Purvasya Dirghona is an extremely big anuvritti. It starts from 63111. It goes all the way till end of 6-3. It enters 6-4 and it goes all the way till many sutras in 6-4. So somewhere randomly I am clicking 6-4-13 and you still have an anuvritti of dirghaha from dhalope purvasya dirghona. So that is a weak reason. Obviously that reason is not correct. If dhalope purvasya dirghona is put in the tripadi, maybe some other dirgha could be used or some other dirgha might be added. So a little bit of alpaksharatvam will be compromised, but this would have been a better structure. But probably Panini Maharshi believed that reusing this dirgha word is more important than the sapada saptadhyayi versus tripadi ordering. Therefore, because that's the only possible explanation at the moment, so therefore he kept dhalope purvasya dirghona in sapada saptadhyayi and allowed the rule of ashrayat siddhatvam to jump from rori to dhalope purvasya dirghona. And with that, we complete today's class. We talked about all the 4 quadrants and there we complete the 4th module of our course, that is Sandhi Prakaranam. First 3 classes were about the Ach Sandhi, Ach Sandho Purvadesha, Ach Sandho Ekadesha and Prakriti Bhava. The next 5 classes were about the Hal Sandhi. The next 2 classes were about the Visargadesha and Rephadesha. So with this, 40% of the course is over. Now what next? In the next week, I don't want to start the new module unless you have real understanding of sandhis. There is no point in going ahead. So we will do at least 50 sandhi exercises in the next week, maybe 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, depending on the speed of the class, possibly more. A sandhi question will be shown on the screen and the attendees will be asked to do the prakriya in class. Everybody must participate. I'm going to ask people to raise their hands, but if I see the same names raising their hands, I'll just start calling names. So sample example, this is what will appear on the screen, Rama plus Su plus Atra. And then if somebody wants to cancel, does somebody want to raise hand and try it out right now? Just as a demo, how the next class is going to go. If somebody wants to try out this prakriya, this is what we learned today. So there is no need of thinking anything. Somebody might raise their hand and then we'll go, Purnima ji. What you have to do, I'll explain first what you have to do. What you have to do is explain one step at a time and just tell me the sutram. No need to have any explanation or just one line explanation is fine. Don't miss out any steps. So what would be the next step?
राम सु अत्र आदौ तु इत्संज्ञालोपः भवति सकारः तिष्ठति
Wait. So once you speak one line, I'm going to make that visible. So correct. Upadeshe ajununasika ityanena itsamnya tasya lopa ityanena lopaha sakara avashishyate. Next.
सकारस्य अत्र ऋत्वं भवति.
Sure. Start. I mean, make it. Be sure to speak sutras. So sakarasya rutvam bhavati sasajushoruhu. Next.
तदनन्तरं अत्र अग्रे अकारः अत्र अस्ति अतः क्षम्यताम्.
That's okay. So tasmat purvam upadeshe ajunasika tasya lopa ityanena ru ityasya lope krute anubandha lope krute repha. Tadanantaram ra, there is an apluta akara before, apluta akara after. So atoror aplutad apluta ityanena ukara desha. What next?
अत्र आदेङ्गुणः
आद्गुणः इत्यनेन गुणैकादेशः रामो अत्र. What next?
अत्र पूर्वरूप संधि
पदान्तादेश सूत्र. This is व्याकरण अष्टाध्यायी. रामो अत्र इति एङ्गपदा. Don't say क्षम्यताम्. This is exactly what I want you to start. Because otherwise I'll keep on teaching classes. Thank you very much. Very well attempted. So I'll keep on teaching classes and you will not remember sutras. So that's not the point of this class. So when we say Shatshatasya Sutranam Vyakhya Sahitam Adhyanam, it is not my Adhyanam. It is your Adhyanam. So you should be able to study all, at least recollect all these sutras with their names. Numbers are optional, but with their names. So what I really want you all to do is write down these sutras by hand, starting from class number 31. Class number 31 to class number 40, write down the sutras by hand with their meaning. You can either use this meaning or you can write your own meaning in Your own in the sense, you can write the meaning in your own words, simple Sanskritam and so on. And remember which sutram is used where. Keep this sheet in front of you. The next class is exactly going to happen like this. Please don't skip or miss, because this is your chance to learn and get used to these kind of exercises. Unless you are thorough with Sandhi Prakaranam sutras, you will not be allowed to enter the Subanta Prakaranam. So I am going to individually pick names. I will mark whether a person is able to answer that or not. If you are not thorough with Sandhi Prakaranam, go back, skip the class, opt out, study the previous 4 modules, and then study remaining from the YouTube videos. I do not want, because as soon as you enter Sandhi Prakaranam, every now and then there is, as soon as you enter Subanta Prakaranam, every now and then there is Sandhis. Ramaha. How do you derive Ramaha? Starting from Rama plus Su, Sasajushoruhu, Kharavasanu Visajanya. That's Ramaha. How do you derive Ramu? Rama plus Au, Vruddhirechi. That's Ramu. So in 40-50% of the cases, it's just Sandhis and Sandhis that's going to be part of the Subanta Prakaranam also. So unless you are thorough with the Sandhi Prakaranam, you should not go ahead. So I will pick up names. I will make sure everybody is answering at least one prakriya correctly, and then we'll go. Maybe it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I really don't care. But unless Sandhi Prakaranam is thoroughly fit in the brain, fixed in the brain, we will not go ahead. Homework for today's class. Sarvatra Padanta Sakahara asti iti matva prakriyam likhata. So simple 10 prakriya examples. Kevalam sutrani lekhaniyani kimapi spashtikaranam navashyakam. And then Sankshepena Uttarata, only 2 questions, 5 marks each. The first question is about Ashrayat Siddhatvam. I have given small questions so that you can just answer them and you will get the marks. And second is संस्कृतस्य प्रारंभिकेषु पुस्तकेषु विसर्गस्य ओकारादेशः रेफः लोपः शकारादेशः शकारादेशः इति अनुचितरूपेण कथं पाठ्यते तत् सोदाहरणं निर्दिश्य पाणिनीयव्याकरणदृष्ट्या तत्र सन्धि कथं भवति तत् सूत्रैः सह विवृणुत. So Sodaharanam doesn't mean give the name of the book and name of the author and all that. That's not Sodaharanam. Give the example of the Sandhi. Say atra visargasya shakaradeshah iti anuchitarupena pathyate. Vastutah atra kim kim bhavet. Etadrusham atra udaharanaihi spashtikaranam datavyam. So that's your homework. I'll give 1 month for submitting the homework for the yesterday's class and today's class. So probably on 30th of September, both the homeworks will be due. So you have 1 month. Please don't delay the homeworks beyond the limit. And obviously, more importantly, start revising the sutras of Sandhi Prakaranam. In the next class, you will need that knowledge while doing the prakriyas. Any further questions? If not, samapayamaha. So that's 40% of our course completed. Hopefully we will go to the Subanta Prakaranam. I'm saying hopefully because unless I'm confident, I'll not take you to the Subanta Prakaranam. So hopefully you all let me start the Subanta Prakaranam probably in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Samapayamaha. Agrima saptahe niyamita rupena abhyas kaksha bhavishyati. अष्टाध्यायी जगन्माता यस्य चित्तात् समुत्थिता वेदानामुपकाराय तस्मै पाणिनये नमः. शब्द ब्रह्म समाराध्य कृतवान्यो विलक्षणं सर्वाश्चर्यमिदं शास्त्रं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः. येन धौता गिरः पुंसां विमलैः शब्दवारिभिः तमश्चाज्ञानजं भिन्नं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः. धन्यवादः.